Welcome back to Askewed Reviews. And since this week is the week of WrestleMania, I thought I would do a couple of trivia reviews for wrestling films. The movie that I'm going with today is the 2000 film Ready to Rumble. Here is your trivia question for today. What style of match do Jimmy King and Diamond Dallas Page face off in at the end of the movie? The answer will be at the end of this episode. In the film Ready to Rumble, we meet our two main characters of Sean and Gordy. These two boys are sanitation workers. However, though, Gordy's father, who is the sheriff, wants Gordy to follow in the family business and become a police officer. But Gordy is not passionate about becoming a cop. In fact, Sean and Gordy are only passionate about one thing: wrestling. And it just so happens that that evening they have tickets to a local wrestling show, which also has their favorite wrestler, Jimmy King, defending his World Heavyweight Championship. Now, wrestling promoter Titus Sinclair is sick of Jimmy King being on top, so he creates a situation where he screws Jimmy out of his title and then fires him. So from here, Jimmy becomes a washed up drunk. However, though, the boys realize that it's up to them to help Jimmy get back up on top. So Gordy and Sean find him, help him sober up, and even get him training from one of the best wrestling coaches in the business. But even with all of their help, can Jimmy King get back to the top and reclaim his championship? This movie was directed by Brian Robbins. It was done in partnership with the wrestling organization known as WCW, or World Championship Wrestling. One of the main stars of this film was David Arquette, who gained a lot of popularity due to appearing in the Scream franchise. David Arquette and his father Louis had always been big fans of wrestling. In fact, Louis even voiced Superfly Jimmy Snuka in Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling cartoon series. Now, leading up to the release of this film, David actually made a bunch of appearances on WCW television. However, though, all of the money he earned from those appearances he donated to the family of deceased wrestler Brian Pillman. Now, that's all well and good, but unfortunately, David Arquette is also part of one of the worst decisions in wrestling history, as 2 weeks after the movie released, for a promotional stunt, they gave him the WCW World Heavyweight title. Here's the thing though, I will actually give some respect though to David Arquette, because years after filming this movie, he would make an attempt at being an independent wrestler, and from my understanding, it wasn't horrible. While filming this movie, Arquette did have a stuntman, and that was wrestler Shane Helms. Now, if you're a big wrestling fan, you probably know who he is, but if you only know wrestling a little bit, you might remember him as the Hurricane. Scott Conn, who is also one of the primary actors in this film, did all of his own stunts for the movie. Oliver Platt also appears in this film as one of the other primary characters, known as Jimmy King. Now, that character is supposed to be based off of two wrestlers, Jerry the King Lawler and Ric Flair. Now, Oliver Platt also had a stunt double that was a wrestler, and that was Chris Kanyon. Once again, if you're not the biggest wrestling fan, you might at least know him as the character of Mortis. Another well known actor that appears in this film is Joe Pantoliano as the character of Titus Sinclair. Now, Sinclair is technically taking the place of Eric Bischoff, because Bischoff was supposed to be in the movie playing himself, but he was actually fired from WCW before filming began. Yet another well known actor that appears in this film is Martin Landau as the character of Sal Bandini. They originally offered that role to Jack Palance, but he turned it down. The character of Sal Bandini, by the way, is supposed to be based off of well-known wrestling coaches Stu Hart and Lou Thez. Well-known actress Rose McGowan also appears in this film as Sasha. By the way, apparently McGowan hated filming this movie. The character of Sasha is supposed to be based off of Kimberly Page. McGowan's the only member of the Nitro Girls in this film that was not an actual Nitro Girl. Now, if you didn't know this, one of the Nitro Girls was in fact Charmel, who, if you know your wrestling knowledge, is married to wrestler Booker T. I mentioned Louis Arquette earlier, and he, along with Kathleen Freeman, also have brief cameos in this film as the parents of Jimmy King. We also have a brief cameo from Caroline Ray as the character of Eugenia King. and an actor who became so well known for making brief appearances in films in the 90s and 2000s, Chris Owen as the character of Isaac. Now, obviously, with this being a wrestling film and the partnership with WCW, there were so many wrestlers that showed up in this movie. Here are just the ones that I'm aware of: Macho Man Randy Savage, Goldberg, Sting, Diamond Dallas Page, Rey Mysterio Jr., Billy Kidman, Juventud Guerrera, Prince Iakea, Perry Saturn, Bam Bam Bigelow, Van Hammer, Kurt Hennig, Disco Inferno, Conan, Booker T, Sid Vicious, and Michael Modest. They also had announcers Gene Okerlund, Tony Schiavone, Mike Tenay, and Michael Buffer, and even two referees, Charles Robinson and Billy Silverman. In this scene, there's also a very brief cameo from a guy who would go on to be a very well known wrestler, and that is John Cena. If you never noticed before, the WCW title that appears in this film looks nothing like the title in real life. If you didn't know, Jimmy King getting screwed over by Diamond Dallas Page is supposed to be based on the real life event known as the Montreal Screwjob involving Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. The animosity and issues between Jimmy King and Titus Sinclair is based off of the real life issues between Eric Bischoff and Ric Flair. The part where Jimmy King is betrayed by his son was based off of a storyline between Ric Flair and his son David. This movie was entirely filmed in California, even though it primarily takes place in Wyoming. There was originally plans for a sequel to this film, but with the apparent death of WCW looming on the horizon, that did not end up happening. So when it comes to the film Ready to Rumble, this is definitely not the best movie, but I will say it is still entertaining, and being the fact that I've always been a wrestling fan, there is quite a bit of nostalgia for me when rewatching this. So I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 5. And if you enjoyed this film, other movies I recommend checking out are Balls of Fury, Basketball, Dodgeball, A True Underdog Story, and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Now it's time to answer the trivia question from the beginning of this episode. What style of match do Jimmy King and Diamond Dallas Page face off in at the end of the movie? And that match was known as the Triple Steel Cage Death Match. Which, by the way, if you didn't know, the Triple Steel Cage match has only been done in real life twice. Once on an episode of WCW Monday Nitro, and at the 2000 Slamboree.
Oh yeah, brother! I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews, and keep an eye out as I do a few more wrestling films throughout this week.